If you have a tight hip flexor and you're finally ready to try something that actually works, instead of just stretching or foam rolling it out for temporary results, this video's for you. I'm going to show you a very powerful exercise that gets great results in both the short and the long term, relieving a tight hip flexor. But there's one key we have to understand first. Your primary hip flexor is called your psoas muscle. It attaches at the side of your lower back vertebrae and runs down and attaches onto your femur or your thigh bone right here. The primary role of the psoas, the main hip flexor, is that when these attachment sites come closer together, it is going to raise the leg up into what we call flexion. But also the underrated component of what this muscle can do is that when it contracts, it turns the spine towards the other side. So if my left psoas contracts, it can turn my lower spine to the right side. It's important to understand that there's two ways a muscle can be tight or feel tight. The first is that it's truly in a shortened position, meaning that the muscle attachment sites are being pulled closer together and they can't properly elongate. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a second. The other thing is that the muscle is in relatively too long of a position and it doesn't have the leverage to properly shorten and contract and do its job. So what's happening is that muscle has tension on it because it can't properly shorten and it's too relatively stretched out. So there's two reasons why your psoas can feel constantly tight. One is that it's in that shortened position, turning your spine to the other side and pulling your hip into flexion, pulling that side of your pelvis forward. The other way is that the spine is actually turned towards that side of the tight psoas. And what's happening is that psoas can't effectively work to bring that side of the pelvis forward and contract and turn the spine to the other side. So we need to determine which one of these cases is what you're dealing with. Ultimately, we're going to be able to best tell depending on which direction your pelvis is turned towards and which way it can more easily turn towards. And let's say it is more easily able to turn towards the right side. Well, then it's likely if you feel a tight left psoas, that psoas is actually in a shortened position. But if your spine or pelvis turns better to the right and your right psoas and hip flexor region feels tight, it's likely because they can't properly actually recruit and activate to pull that side of the pelvis forward and get you turning to the other side. A really effective test that you can use that's easy that will help you determine which direction your pelvis has a bias turning towards is called an active pelvis rotation test. This is really quite simple. And all you need to do is just lay on your back on the ground and turn your hips from side to side in a specific way. But this is no means a comprehensive assessment. You can't make huge determinations concretely based off of just one test, but this will give you a good idea, and I'm trying to keep things simple here. If you want a more thorough assessment and you want to get even better of an idea of how your pelvis turns and what it looks like and the asymmetries of it, check out my lateral pelvic tilt video. We will link that down below in the description. This is the active pelvis rotation test. What we're gonna do is lay on a surface that's carpeted or just comfortable. Anything that's not hardwood or concrete, as that will be uncomfortable. We're going to get in a position where we are on our back, our feet and knees are together, our feet start flat, and we're going to have our arms out to the side like this, and you want your palms up. You don't want to be too low, you don't want to be too high. Just around directly out from your shoulders is ideal. Now you want to have your heels pulled as close to your butt as you possibly can while still being comfortable and being able to keep your whole foot nice and flat. If you pull them too close, you're not going to be able to get your heels nice and flat. So find that place where you're comfortable. Now, keeping your feet and knees together and keeping your eyes directly at the ceiling and your chin at the ceiling, you're going to just let your knees fall off to one side. And you're going to control this descent, stopping at the point where if you went any further, you would have to lift that shoulder off of the ground, that back shoulder. You need to stop just before that point. So for me, that's probably right here, going to the right. Now you can go back to center. This is 0 degrees. Going off to the left, this is now adding range of motion to that measurement. And then I'll probably need to stop right here. If I go any further than this, my right shoulder is gonna lift off of the ground, and that would be the end of the test. Let's say, for example, you could turn your pelvis more easily to the right than you could the left. You're going to do the following exercise laying on your left side, and the inverse would be true if your assessment was the opposite. If your knees more easily went to the left, then you would do the following exercise laying on your right side. After doing this exercise for about 2 sets of 5 to 8 breath cycles very well, and make sure you execute it well, because that's gonna be the key. We're gonna talk about common mistakes. You should be able to retest this rotation and notice an improvement going in both directions, but especially the limited side. That's how you know you did it right. If this video is making sense to you and you like using objective assessments to determine what specific exercises you should do and how you should do them, I have 2 great resources that will give you the tools to better improve your body's posture and movement limitations. The first thing I have is a new Own Your Body course. This course is designed for literally anyone to be able to do, and it will give you a really good idea of what exactly is going on with your posture and movement limitations, why they are the way they are, and what specific exercises you can do, like this one, to improve those limitations. The other thing that I have is my Beginner Body Restoration program. This is more of a generalized program designed to address so many different asymmetries and postural and movement limitations out there, but it's a little bit less individualized than the actual course itself. So I'll link both down below in the description. One is probably gonna click with you better than the other and be more attractive to you, but they're both great options for these types of issues. This is the side lying abduct and shift exercise progression series. So in this 4-step progression, we're going to go through a sequence of events, but we need to make sure that we master the first progression before moving on to the second one. It's absolutely key we get that in place first. So please don't rush this progression. Let's talk about the setup, because that is going to by far be the most important thing to ensure success. So first, we have a pillow double folded underneath the head. So that way the head is nice and relaxed, nice and chill. If anything, it's very slightly side bent to the ceiling, but it should be very minimal, maybe 5 to 10 degrees max. The other thing that we have is underneath the lowest ribs is a little bit of a rolled up beach towel, shower towel, yoga mat, whatever. That's just gonna side bend us a little bit to that side. That way the bottom side hip can still stay on the floor there. Now what we're gonna do is find our leg on a couch, a box, whatever the setup you use. You might have to finagle a little bit, get a little creative. So that way, this leg can be at a 90-degree bend, or less than that is okay if it's a little bit lower than that, but it's pressing up against that object. And then this top leg is in a position where the foot is just ever so slightly higher than the hip. So for most people, this is about as high as I would go. I would not go much higher than this. If anything, a little bit lower might be more appropriate for more people. So we're going to first start by getting as straight of a line from this top leg to that head right there. So Jacob's gonna slide this leg back slowly, stopping at the point where if he were to go back any further, his rib cage would flare and his back would arch. Don't go to that point. Stop just short of that, but you should have as straight of a line as you can realistically get right here. And this is a hip extended position. So for Jacob, it looks like he's able to get pretty much in line right there, and that's great. So to initiate the exercise, all Jacob's gonna do is maintain his ribs tucked in, that tunnel where his left abs are, and he's gonna keep his neck and low back relaxed. What he's gonna do is just simply reach the right leg away from him, keeping the right hip rolled over. Not opening up like this, but keeping it rolled over and square ahead. That's going to engage his outside hip muscle on the right side where his gluteus medius is, and also a little bit of his right lower butt cheek too, potentially. So the only muscle groups in his body Jacob should feel are his right butt cheek glutes and downside side abs, his left side. You may feel a tiny bit of groin on this leg right here. You may or you may not. It's not the end of the world. If you feel a little bit, that's okay. But really, that's it. Your neck and low back should be relaxed. You need to make sure your ribs stay tucked in. So Jacob's just gonna breathe in through his nose, out through his mouth, staying as relaxed as he can. Just focus on creating the synchronous contraction of the right outside hip with the left abs. Now, it's important that as you go through this, you're not feeling your rib cage start to flare. So one thing you can do is take your top arm and just place that hand on the ribs to make sure they're staying tucked in and you're not flaring them at all, because many people, by far the most common mistake is that people will want to arch their back. Be very mindful that is not happening. If you're having a hard time trying to feel those downside left side abs, or you feel like your top side abs are taking over, what you could do is you could take your top arm and go bicep to ear. Not getting the arm too far behind the body, because if you do that, you're just gonna extend and arch your back. Don't do that. Let the arm be out in front of you a little bit and still keep your rib cage tucked in. So now when Jacob inhales, he's gonna feel expansion here. That should help him feel more downside side abs because he's crunched, but he doesn't wanna lose that tongue. There's two huge common mistakes that will absolutely impede how much progress and how much success you have with this exercise. The first is that as you start to get tired, you're going to see a temptation and feel a temptation to start to flare your rib cage and arch your low back. Don't do that. Stop the exercise before that happens. Even if it's just 2 breaths you can get before you feel that happen, stop it there, reset, and go again. The other thing is, as people start to get tired, they're gonna roll this hip back, and that usually is paired with flaring the rib cage too. So don't let that happen. Keep the hip rolled forward and the hip underneath you and a little bit of that posterior pelvic tilt. I would recommend doing this exercise, as I mentioned, for 2 sets of 5 to 8 breath cycles. And I would do that at least every single day for a couple of weeks to start seeing these things stick and seeing these improvements last over time. If you found that this exercise was maybe a little bit too challenging for you, I will link down below in the description an alternative that you can do that has the same intention and likely similar benefits. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.